Hello, this is my response to Ebony's video on the effects of poverty in later years. It stuck out to me as well the amount of people living in poverty as they get older. 9% of seniors currently are living in poverty, and even though the government has created Social Security as a way for them to live comfortably, but the majority of them are not. They're not, I guess not the majority of them, but a lot of them are not. And so a lot of them are getting Social Security and they're not making it by on that. They can't afford their medication, they can't afford housing, they can't afford transportation, they can't afford food. There's all kinds of issues there. If they own a house, a lot of them are losing their houses at an old age. And if they're renting, they end up being homeless. So there's a lot of issues there. And then they have to have their medication, and it's just not coming through. And so even with Medicaid, or Medicare for older adults, but it's not enough. So prescriptions and not everything's covered under Medicare. And then transportation, if they get to a certain age and they don't feel comfortable driving anymore, and they maybe live in a city without much public transportation, then how do they get around? A lot of them don't. Not too long ago, I went down to West Virginia with my church group of junior hires. I'm a leader for a small group, and we went down there and we were just doing service projects around this little city, Scott Depot. I had never heard of it in my life before then. And we went to this older lady's house. She was 86 years old. Her name was Phyllis, and she lived alone. She had never been married. She lived in the house that her parents owned. So she had, I want to say, 8 or 9 other siblings, not all of which were still alive, but one of them lived right across the street from her slightly younger sister, but they were all pretty high up there in age range, and she lived by herself. She was very lonely. I remember we came over to paint the outside of her house, and I remember whenever I would get the chance to talk to her, she just loved having someone to listen, and so that's I think a big thing that poverty, this discussion, talking about how women want to seek out more intimacy, more relationships, and it's still hard because of transportation issue. And so she didn't drive herself anymore. She would get a ride from her brother or her sister or whoever was close by to go get her medications. And I didn't ask about her income or about any specifics. I'm sure she, owned the house because her parents had owned it and they just passed it on to her. But she was getting so high up there in age, and she just couldn't do a lot of things on her own. She couldn't really clean that well, and she had 2 birds. She didn't have any cats or dogs or anything, but she was just so sweet. And right before we left, she started crying because she didn't want us to leave, and I wanted to stay there forever and hang out with her because she was just so sweet. And I'm very impartial towards elderly people. I lived with my grandma for several years, and she's one of my best friends. And I'm thankful. I've seen how my grandma, she gets Social Security, but she also gets part of my grandpa's pension, and so she's living comfortably, but she's always lived frugally. And a lot of elderly people, I think that's why the poverty rate is a little bit lower for seniors, 9% of them only. I guess in some states there's a lot higher of a rate, but the overall average is a little bit lower than the general population. And so, yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that we're running into is that people are living longer, and so they're outliving their financial resources. And there's just a lot more with baby boomers, and just a lot more seniors in Social Security. As much as they're trying to use that as a good tool, it's just not working as well. And so there are pensions and stuff like that from old companies, but it's just becoming fewer and far between. Most people are living on Social Security, and the average that I see a person that is elderly receiving is around, I would say, 900. The majority of the time I see a lot of people around 750 range, but sometimes I see people a little bit higher. So I'd say around 900, 950 is the average. And to imagine living off of that, rent alone, even for a small apartment in just Summit County. Summit County is cheap compared to other places. Just renting is going to take up the majority of that if they have to pay utilities. Food, some people qualify for food stamps, but a lot of them, if they earn too high of an income, then Job and Family Services cuts them off and maybe gives them $15. I've seen that a couple times. $15, they're going to be able to buy some bananas and a couple cans of food with that. And yeah, I mean, 21% Social Security is their only income, and so it's just astounding that so many people are living off of such a low amount. If they have to pay for car insurance, that's when transportation gets cut off. Medical bills, if they have to go to the hospital. Oh my word, if someone had to go to the emergency room, got the ambulance called, that is so expensive, and I don't know how much Social Security would cover, but from what I hear, it's not very much, especially for situations like that. So, but yeah, they have no options. They can't work. They can't go back to school. They're stuck where they're at, so they just have to rely on social services to help them out of any negative situations, and it doesn't always work out that way. So I think we need to change some of those situations. We need to provide more for our elderly, and I don't see why, if the government's getting so much in tax dollars, if they're not willing to put more into Social Security. But it's interesting how different government agencies want their funding, and even if that means one government agency gets funding, but Social Security, those people that are getting Social Security, they end up having to rely on other social service agencies as well. It's just astounding to me that we can't all work together and have a common goal, but they're all separate. Housing agencies are separate from Social Security, and Job and Family Services separate from those. Any kind of senior agencies. I know there's Center for Aging in Akron. Direction Homes works a lot with elderly, and so trying to help people get into housing that are elderly, or trying to help them get Medicare and all that stuff paid for. So it just really interesting to think about how much certain agencies get and how much certain agencies don't, and how everybody has to go around that. And I hope some of this made sense.